Hey, John, thanks for joining my tech talk. I really appreciate it. You doing good today?
Doing wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about GuardSight, what you guys do? I'm really excited about learning more, and the security world that you guys are in is pretty fascinating. What you guys deal with.
Yeah, it's definitely we like to say bad guys are good for business right now. It's depends on, I guess, what side of the fence you're on that. So GuardSight is a cybersecurity as a service company. We're a tactical cyber company. So we provide three main things for our customers. And the way to think about that, the simplest way to think about that is OAR, like an oar in a boat, that acronym. And so the O is for security operations. So this is, traditional tip of the spear, daily contact with the enemy type stuff. This is bad guys shooting at you. Do you know what to do? This, of course, is all e-warfare. Bad guys shooting at you. Do you know what to do? Are you inspecting your cyber weapons? So we all have cyber weapons in the environment that we use to defeat bad guys. We want to make sure those are at the ready and that they're working. And the third thing in the SecOps world is threat hunts or data patrols. So the analogy here would be bad guy got a ticket to get into the stadium, looks like everybody else. You got to find him and get him out. So that's the old portion of our business in a nutshell. This is traditional managed detection and response, threat detection and response, see bad guy, shoot bad guy type stuff. The second thing that we do for our customers is the A is the assessments. And so we do three main things here. We perform vulnerability assessments. So this is effectively inspecting attack surfaces, assets for their attack surfaces and the vulnerabilities that could yield compromise if a bad guy were to exploit those. The second thing are penetration assessments, which is more go get the loot and tell us how you got it. And the third thing in there is general vulnerability management. So the idea there is you inspect your assets for their vulnerabilities, but then there's this ongoing process of managing, patching, and we work with companies like PulseOne actually in hand to make these things happen. So the idea is prioritization of vulnerabilities, things that can be remedied in terms of getting those vulnerabilities repaired, and then that ongoing hygiene that's vulnerability management. The third thing we do is the R column of the OAR, which is response. So this is effectively your assets have been compromised and you need a team to come in and contain, eradicate the threat and recover the assets. And so we have what's called a mission model where we come in and effectively analyze the bad guy verbs, which is called the kill chain, and we issue courses of action, which are effectively the good guy verbs. We collect the nouns of the attack, which are the indicators of compromise, and then we help companies with opportunities for improvement. Sometimes they're called lessons learned. We call them opportunities for improvement, which basically put the companies so that they have action items after the attack to help prevent that attack from happening again. So, again, the simplest thing for us is OAR, and that's what we do. We have two classes of customers, if you will. We have what we call the enterprise level customers. So these are really large customers that are billion-dollar customers, and they specifically hire us as a SecOps unit, oftentimes to ride alongside their SecOps teams. And in some cases, we just are their SecOps units. So we have a security operations center, cybersecurity operations center up in southern Utah, about 3 hours north of Las Vegas, 3 hours south of Salt Lake City. But the first class of customer there is the enterprise customer. Second class of customer, which is really the big growth market and the market that we spend a lot of time in, and we have the majority of our customers in, is the SMB market, small to medium-sized business, small to medium-sized enterprise. So these are customers from everywhere from, I think we probably have some customers maybe as low as 10 million in our portfolio, all the way up to 500 million. And these are everything from manufacturing firms to biopharmaceutical firms to foreign currency firms to SaaS companies that are just doing business on all SaaS models. And there's of course thousands, hundreds of thousands of these small to medium-sized businesses, and of course with people doing more and more business on the internet, that's a really big growth market for us. Anyway, that's our the kind of our business model in a nutshell.
Great. And what you're not is you're not a MSP or an IT company, right?
That is correct. Yeah. We work with companies like PulseOne. As a matter of fact, our two companies together really create this force multiplier for companies when we go in together to effectively, one, not only manage just the general hygiene of assets, the inventorying of assets, the break fix of assets, the upgrading of assets, the implementation of new technologies. Those are all handled by our partners like PulseOne.
Right.
And what GuardSight handles, of course, is just the guarding of those assets, the threat monitoring and detection of those assets. And we bring weaponry with us. When I talk about weaponry, cyber weaponry, this could be everything from SIM platforms to endpoint detection and response platforms. Those are probably the two most common weapons today, which is effectively allowing us to collect logs. So we go in with one of our partners. What our partner does is we'll come in, we'll drop in our sensors. Our partner points the intel, the machine intelligence to the sensors, whether it's in a SaaS, it's in the cloud, or whether it's on-prem. A lot of SMBs have both. And with the COVID situation, a lot of SMBs now, their employees are working from home. And
right.
So you've got to be able to way to get that data in. In some cases, customers bring their own infrastructure, or our partner already has the infrastructure. Like you may already just present them the infrastructure, and we'll manage that infrastructure. So when I say what infrastructure, that's weaponry. So we're not the firewall change request company. That's a partner who handles that.
Right.
We don't do anything.
Right.
So.
And what about the regular maintenance, like patching, updates, all that? Are you guys doing that part, or is that mostly the IT department or the MSP?
Yep, the MSP. So we work with the MSP to do that. We typically don't touch the assets. There are a couple of rare conditions where we've done that. But in most cases, what we do is it's the other way. So you think about sometimes like the MSP calls in the SecOps company because they need a special forces unit to come in there and manage their security. But in a lot of cases, what we do is companies call us for security, and then we'll say, you really need some help with your IT management. Like your security management is one thing, and we're happy to help you get that done and get those missions accomplished. Oftentimes, these call-ins are for, incident response is, effectively a beachhead there where they've called us in and they said, hey, we've been hacked and we need your help. Right. And then they'll ask for an ongoing protection package. But what happens is, of course, we'll see their environment and their hygiene and say, what you really could use also in here is a partner. And it handles the IT management, and then we'll call in PulseOne for something.
Right. That's great. We're seeing the statistics on our end that the small business is one of the largest targets now. It's seeing a shift from the enterprise, bad guys going after the enterprise, and they're going after the small business, and I think it's above 72%. Are you guys starting to see that as well?
Oh yeah, we've been seeing that for a long time. We're an 11-year-old company. We transitioned from primarily a consulting organization that would pretty much ride as staff aug and security operations center for large enterprises to a traditional managed detection and response company that handles that. And when I'm a founder of the business, and when we started the business in 2009. The target was the SMB because I ran, security operations centers in some of the largest, organizations. And the one thing that I recognized was that we in the large enterprise company, we have, really, I won't say unlimited resources, but compared to what the SMB has, they appear to be unlimited.
Right.
Yeah. And we also not only could purchase the best weaponry, but we could also purchase the best operators of that weaponry. Mm-hmm. And so they join our teams, and that was really strong. So we have these large fortresses of protection that are well armored, defense in depth, educated people, experienced people on these teams. And then downstream connected into us is a small to medium-sized business that has none of that. Yep. And you could kind of think of like maybe, taking this, cylinder of liquid here and, taking this straw and putting it in the bottom of the cup where this is the SMB. That was kind of where it was. And so the idea was we should probably go down and protect these guys. Yep. And in 2009, and maybe up until maybe 2014, 2015, maybe a little bit later, of course, the bad guys just, targeted the big guys.
Yep.
Because that's where it was. And the big guys get smart, and they started fortifying their systems. And then the bad guys said, well, we need to go to the next target, which is the soft targets. And it turns out these soft targets actually have not only access to the big guys, but they've got a lot of really good data too.
Yep.
Or they've got things that we can, compromise, and we can ransomware them, and we can extort them, and they're more likely to pay, and they're, they can't fight us, and they're smart. And so that's kind of how that model has shifted. And so now the majority of the attacks, at least in our environment, it's majority is a relative term, because we receive, hundreds of thousands of, email attacks for large enterprises because they've got 5,000 employees or 10,000 employees or whatever it is.
Right.
But the actual, the number of attacks proportionately are, they're going after the little guys. And and I shouldn't say little guys. These companies are $200 million companies.
Right.
That are well-established companies in manufacturing or biopharmaceutical space or whatever it is. All types of stuff, nonprofits, or
right.
A company of 30 people running a SaaS company that's doing $100 million.
Right.
And,
right.
These are really good targets for these guys. And of course, the advent of the cloud has made it, has reduced the barrier of entry for companies to be able to do business on the internet and or just in general, and do business. And so they've become really good targets. So yeah, we would 100% concur with your statistic there. It's probably even higher than that, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're also seeing too the transition, the SMB market to the cloud. It's even easier for the bad guys to find you, right? Because it used to be you had a firewall and all your servers were behind it, and they had to hack that one IP address, and it was a little bit harder, or a phishing attack and all that. But now I can just go to office.com and get right into your CEO's email.
Yeah. We think about like WordPress sites and Drupal sites and their exposure, and part of this is because and it's just not those particular technologies, but the people that will watch this will probably resonate with them. Like, oh man, the challenge is that it's they've made it easy to do business, but the configurations are complicated still.
Right.
So you guys know this because you're cloud certified folks. Some of these configurations are really complicated.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like it's kind of like if you think about like Soho routers. If you could imagine where manufacturers put egress controls on Soho routers, they would have never made it, because nobody would be able to figure out that we need to open the egress ports.
Right.
And so they don't put them in.
Right.
And it's the same thing with like cloud features. But the fact is like these things are really complicated systems, and they've reduced the barrier to entry, but that doesn't mean that they're configured properly. So the interesting thing about cloud is oftentimes in cloud, it's not necessarily that the asset has a vulnerability, because the cloud providers do a really good job of maintaining those and their infrastructure in terms. What it is they're configured wrong.
Right. And
they've allowed the bad guys to get in that way. So It's not that you'll see a fish in the cloud as much as what you're talking about. Like just this morning, I was reading about a medical firm that had released a bunch of information on a G Drive share that was not configured properly. For those of us that know how to configure those things, and those of us know how to configure AWS buckets, or Azure, we'd be like, how could you possibly let that happen?
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, a lot of SMB owners, they don't have that skill set, and they're just, hey, we could do it up here. It's going to be cheaper. Just get it going, and then we'll figure it out.
Right.
But the bad guys are waiting for them, or they arrive at the same time. So it's totally true.
Yeah, they make it to where it's very easy to start. Come on in and get started in your service in the cloud, and then you're like, okay, I'm started, and it's wide open.
Yeah, the bad guy's like, hey, thanks, man. Yeah, it's totally, and it's scary. And of course, regulation is. There's a lot of that's the other thing too. There's a lot of regulation behind this now, especially in like where you're at in with the CCPA and what's happening in New York and throughout the country. There's lots of breach laws now, but the regulation around protecting data is really important. I'm not sure a lot of these small businesses are even aware of it. It's not just that. I think it's probably what's more prevalent now. You may have a different perspective on it though. is just business disruption. Like companies are not prepared for business continuity and business resilience and the management of risk, and that's all stuff, by the way, that we give to our partners to handle, because we're grunts, we're the guys on the ground just fighting with the enemy. But all those things are really important to companies, which why they should be considering companies like yours and MSPs that can help them strategically with make sure that these things are being done right. Like by the way, it's not just about your data being backed up. And in the case of ransomware, I mean, that's great. The bad guys, we figured out, hey, if we just back up the data, we don't need to deal with them. And they were like, au contraire.
Right.
I have a new guy on my team who's from France, so that's for him. Is that the extortion of that data? So
totally.
what I've done is exfilled that data, and now when you come back to me and say I don't want to pay the ransom, or I'm going to pay the ransom, I'm also then going to follow that up with hey, guess what? I'm going to go ahead and put this. I want to put it on the dark net. I'll just put it where everybody can get it. And that's not good. And so that's extortion there. And by the way, our companies, like a company like GuardSight, this is what I was talking about, threat hunts and data patrols. These are the things that we do. So we're looking for those indicators of, hey, did we just egress, 5 gig worth of data to a place that we've never egressed 5 gigs worth of data before?
Right.
And by the way, 5 gigs worth of data goes pretty darn quick. Or we'll call it 100 gig worth of data. Right. And so, if you're nighty night sleeping it off between 0100 and 0600 in the morning, when you wake up, that data's gone. So if you don't have teams of people or robots watching this stuff to arrest it, you're going to be in for a world of hurt.
I'm hearing in the MSP world, when the bad guys are in, they're actually in for 6 months to 2 years before they do the attack. Are you seeing that also?
Yeah, I mean, dwell time, I think, has gotten much better. It's probably who they're surveying. I think it's probably a lot like surveying people about their politics. People don't talk about it, even though they have positions on it. So you can talk to companies, they're not going to tell you. The data that we're seeing on response time comes from abstract talking about it abstractly in terms of what response companies like ours and lots of other companies have discovered in terms of how long the threat actors were in there. So the answer is yes. It's it could be as long as 2 years. It might be more likely today is probably closer to 2 months to maybe 2 to 6 months. But that's still a long time. And usually when the bad guy lands, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to start their cycle back over again, which is they've got to perform reconnaissance in the environment. Right. And so that reconnaissance takes time. And it also usually creates noise. And so you want to be in position to effectively, you really need to be in position to reduce dwell time. It's for business owners that are going to watch this or listening to this, it's no different than if you had an uninvited guest into your house and they just stayed in your house it's a rodent.
Right.
They just, they got into your attic and then the next thing you know, they started having babies and, and they just kept moving, and their babies had babies and they kept moving, and they just grew laterally. And then by the time you got on there, instead of you having one rodent, you had, 100 rodents. Right. And it's kind of the same concept, maybe a little bit dumbed down, but it's basically that's the way to think about it. So the idea is when you get the rodent, you got to kill the rodent, and you got to get rid of the dwell time. And I say kill them because that's kind of the attitude that you need to take. These threat actors have violated your assets. They've compromised your assets. They're trying to create pain, harm, injury to you in some way. They're there for a reason, and so you have to take that approach like. You got to get on them quick. You got to kill them. You got to get them out, because if you don't, they're gonna stay there. What you're talking about is dwell time, and the longer they're there, the more damage they're going to cause, and the harder they are to be able to get out. And different threat actor groups have different motivation or motives behind this. Some are low and slow. Some are quick. It just depends on what their objective is and their target. They may land on a gold mine and just siphon stuff from you from here till eternity. Right. They may get in there and just quickly egress that 100 gig of data that we were talking about.
Right.
In either case, you need to be in a position to be able to detect it and then eradicate it.
And is that what your service? That's what I'm reading and getting familiar with it as an MSSP, which you guys are. Is you're able to see when the bad guys are getting in, and so that way you can fight back. Versus if you don't have an MSSP's technology in, you don't know that the bad guys are there.
That's affirmative. So the idea is that you have to first put optics on the situation. So the first thing you really need to do is probably the best model for people to use is the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. I think is how the acronym of that goes. So the 5 core values there. So you want to basically identify what assets you have in the environment. That's the very first thing. So most of the time, companies don't even know what they have.
Yeah.
And so, if they have a company like yours there, they do because, well, you know what they have.
Right.
Right. And so that's the first part. What is it that we have? And then where's our treasure? And what does our vulnerability landscape look like on that? What are we vulnerable to with those particular assets? Then, of course, the next way to think about that is detection. And so, I term it like you got to put optics on the situation. Like you got to be able to see what's going on in order to be able to do something about it. It's not just react to it. Of course, that's the primary thing you're going to do. But in order to protect those assets, you got to be able to see what's going on. So once you put those optics in, then you can get mature about how to protect things. And then when you do get attacked, to be able to respond to it. And, if you have to recover the asset because of a compromise, then you'll be able to recover the asset. So the answer to your question is yes, you have to be able to put weaponry in the environment, sensors effectively, where you can send data. You also want to be able to take that data, log data, and be able to, make it so that it's, we can search it long term. Because when you talked about dwell time, so let's say you got a bad guy in your environment for 6 months, but you've only been let's say you haven't been keeping any logs. But logs, of course, are systems sending machine intelligence, right? Whether they're, a laptop or whether it's a server, or whether it's an IoT device, or whether it's an infrastructure device like a router or a switch or something, you want to get those logs and you want to put them in a repository, a lake where you can actually search this stuff after the fact. So be able to go back and say, yep, this is where it started, and trace the threat actor through the kill chain. And so a lot of companies don't do that.
Right.
So it's not just about the current situation that's going on. It's like, oh, wait a minute, we found a bad guy and he's been in here for 4 months. Well, how do you know that? Like, can we go back and look at all the asset logs from 4 months ago and see that? That's kind of the way to think about that. And by the way, companies like yours are good at this too, like setting up these infrastructures for us so that they're available for us when we need to get in there, fight, do some reconnaissance on a mission, those response mission, those kind of things.
So how do we get started? How does a business get started with GuardSight? Do you first come in and do an assessment?
I call Michaela on my team, and Michaela's sitting across from me. People can't see Michaela, but yeah. So that's a great question. You can kind of think about. There's usually 3 ways that companies get introduced to us if it doesn't come through a partner. So even if it does come through a partner, so a company usually say to like PulseOne, we'd like to perform an assessment on the assets that we have, a vulnerability assessment, or even a penetration assessment. And there's a distinction between the two. And what I would say is if you've never had a vulnerability assessment, don't worry about stealing the loot. Get a vulnerability assessment done. Like it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, we know that they went in the house and got the jewelry. We need to know, like, okay, well, how did they get into the house and get the jewelry? Maybe button it down so that you know that there's only 1 or 2 places that they could have gotten in. That type of deal. Probably not the best analogy, but you get the idea. Yeah, start with a vulnerability assessment. The other way sometimes they start, which is an unfortunate way, which is that they've been compromised. And so you're going to come in and help them recover. And then some companies just start straight up with a SecOps, threat detection and response contract with us, which are typically annual contracts that either get invoiced monthly or they can pay annually, whatever they we give them both models. And we usually work through our partners like that anyway. So PulseOne says, hey, GuardSight's our partner for that. You manage the relationship. GuardSight effectively works for PulseOne, helping manage that particular customer. So those are the 3 ways. Those are the 3 ways that they come in. And the SecOps is usually driven by either that there's awareness, they've got a chief information security officer, they've got some data privacy officer, or they've got a partner like PulseOne who says we need a threat detection and response unit. They've got to comply with a DoD regulation like NIST 800-171 or 853, or they've got to comply with some state regulation like a CCPA or maybe they've got a large vendor that wants them to comply with, cybersecurity controls or some other, control, framework effectively.
What about any kind of regulatory compliance like HIPAA or PCI?
HIPAA, PCI, all those are. PCI is a big driver. Companies have done a great job of just, tokenizing data now, so reducing the attack surface for PCI, but PCI still has its requirements. A lot of companies in the SaaS model use third-party vendors now for that kind of stuff who have done a really good job of protecting the assets. So they've kind of taken that, some of that off. HIPAA is really big. I mentioned some of the DoD requirements that are happening now, especially for manufacturers that are making parts for military aircraft or just military components in general.
Yeah.
Anything really. Having those environments protected. But yeah, regulatory, CCPA, and I mentioned that at the top of the show, in California, really big. COVID's probably helped slow that down somewhat. And but the CMMC, again, probably COVID's helped slow some of that down. It's helped some of these vendors out that have had to, in order to comply with the requirements, which is a good thing, by the way. I'm not a believer in regulation, of course, unless it benefits me. Then I'm happy to partake in it. But I remember even when PCI first came in, back when dinosaurs were roaming the earth way back at the turn of the century. I think I could say that now. It was a pain in the ass. And I'd say it was one of the best things that ever happened, really. Right. And by the way, that's an independent council. That's not like it's not a government regulatory body, which shows you, hey, things can succeed without that. But there is both private council, compliance requirements and government regulatory for cyber. It's a big driver for sure.
Thank you, John. It was a good learning lesson for me, and look forward to doing the security thing with you.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.